"If you can dance this waltz, I'll marry my son to you." William Turner spoke loud enough for the entire Manhattan elite to hear, raising his champagne glass and pointing straight at the black woman who had just fumbled and dropped a tray of crystal glasses. The sharp crash of glass shattering against marble silenced the ballroom instantly. 200 guests froze mid-conversation, all eyes turning toward the new contract janitor who had only been working for 3 weeks, Keisha Moore, 35. Beside him, Jack Turner, 28, flushed red and lowered his head. "Dad, stop it." But William, drunk on both power and $1,000 whiskey, strode into the center of the hall like a judge presiding over a trial. His voice dripped with arrogance. "Someone who can't keep the hall clean surely can't keep time with music. Turn on the waltz. Let's see if she can even move." The event manager started to intervene, but William brushed him off. "Place your bets, 500 on Victoria, 1,000 on the cleaning lady, and listen carefully. If she stumbles or stops midway, I want her on her knees scrubbing this floor in front of everyone." Laughter rippled through the room, the kind of genteel chuckles muffled behind white gloves. A few men shook their heads as if it were just another evening's entertainment. Victoria Parker, 50 years old, the so-called ballroom instructor to Manhattan high society, stepped forward with a satisfied smile. "Darling, must I really stoop to this?" William flattered his wife. "You won the Club Waltz trophy last year." More than enough to demonstrate. Still kneeling, Kesha gathered the shards of crystal, but her eyes told another story. They weren't frantic. They weren't humiliated. They were calm, flat, like the surface of a lake silently recording every snicker, every disdainful glance. She rose slowly, straightening her back, wiping her hands against her apron. "I accept," she said, her voice slicing the room in two. Heads craned. William blinked, thinking he had misheard. "What did you say?" "I said, I accept. And when I dance better than your wife, you'll keep your word, even if it was just a joke." A wave of gasps rippled across the hall, the audience convinced they were about to witness the humiliation of the decade. No one noticed the spark that flashed in her eyes, a light some of them had seen before without recognizing it. 15 years ago, that same look had brought the American National Ballet audience to its feet for minutes of thunderous applause. Back then, her name had been Keisha Monroe, principal dancer, soaring across the grandest stages, praised by critics as the equal of legends. Then came the Black Night, a performance for political dignitaries. A car spun sideways, metal twisted, glass shattered, and 3 months of coma. Doctors had said she might walk again, if lucky. Dancing professionally, impossible. She had learned to walk again, learned to be silent, learned not to listen to impossible. At the edge of the hall, Marcus Reed, early 60s, the building's chief of security, moved closer, pretending to check his radio. He leaned in. "I used to work at the National Theater. I saw you 15 years ago." Kesha gave a small nod. "I thought you didn't make it," he said softly, eyes moist. "The press said many things," she replied, "not all of them true." Then, quickly, "After I dance, no matter what happens, I need you to record everything, especially their reactions." Marcus understood instantly. She was turning a drunken boast into a public contract. He nodded. "I'm worried," he admitted. William prowled the floor like a predator thrilled with the show he'd staged. He raised his voice. "And when you lose, you're fired." "Understood." The crowd murmured uneasily. A moral line had just been crossed, but most were secretly entertained, believing they were still safe inside the old script. The rich win, the despised lose. Keisha's gaze cut into William, her eyes cooling into steel. "When I win, besides that so-called marriage promise, I want you to apologize publicly for judging a woman based solely on her skin color and her job." The air tightened. Someone coughed. William burst out laughing. "You're bold, I'll give you that. Fine, I agree." He had no idea he had just bound himself in front of 200 witnesses and dozens of phones. Victoria flipped her hair. "All right then, let's begin." The DJ, a young man named Eddie, shot her an uneasy glance but queued up a classical waltz anyway. Victoria stepped out, spine straight, feet positioned correctly, hands in proper form. It was a performance neat enough for club circles, but safe, predictable. A show polished for appearance, missing the danger that makes art alive. Polite applause followed. William grinned smugly. "And now, our guest artist." Keisha walked to the center. Every step she placed on the floor seemed to measure the heartbeat of the room. Eddie asked out of courtesy, "Which piece would you like?" "The same one," she answered, "but from the beginning." William guffawed. "You want a second chance? Very well." No one realized she had just chosen the very music she had danced hundreds of times at her peak, one of the final nights before the crash, when Lincoln Center shook with a standing ovation. Her preparation was subtle. Only those who had once worked backstage would notice. A slight epaulement to warm the shoulder joints, a gentle plie to loosen the knees, a port de bras to awaken the arms. "Music," she whispered. Eddie nodded. The music swelled. Gravity shifted. On the very first beat, Kesha kept everything as small as possible. She let the room sit inside its own prejudice for a few more seconds, like pulling a spring to its limit, then released it. A shift so subtle it was almost invisible. The flick of a wrist, the tilt of a chin at just the right angle, the torso turning as though whispering to the music. The musicians glanced at one another. Something was different. The precision of timing, the firmness of balance, the truth of emotion. This was not someone who took dance lessons for social grace. This was a body trained to listen. Formally, she was dancing a waltz, but in essence, she was translating the academic language of ballet into the syntax of waltz. Epaulement, shoulder placement, soft yet strong. Port de bras, lines of the arms, telling the story in place of words. Each adagio, each slow passage, laying a veil of mist over a room overheated with curiosity. Then she spun a pirouette, something not found in ballroom vocabulary. Once, twice, 3 times. Her spotting was razor-sharp, her hair untouched, her axis unshaken. The laughter stopped. Victoria's smirk twitched, her stomach wobbling with unease. For the first time that night, William Turner was silent. Keisha did not recount her past. Her body spoke it. Each pirouette was a way of saying, "I've heard impossible for long enough." Each grounded step declared, "I learned to walk again." Then she launched into a grand jeté, splitting the air into an arrow, her back leg slicing a line of silk across the void. An arts patron gasped, "My God!" Those who had once sat inside the National Theater knew instantly. This wasn't a beginner. This was the signature of someone who had once commanded crowds with nothing but movement. The music swelled, and Keisha raised the stakes. A chain of fouettes, whip-like spins one after another, ripped the ballroom from its safe shoreline. Each fouette demanded years of discipline and physical endurance, but what made the room hold its breath wasn't just the technique, it was how she placed them. Exactly where they needed to go, like an argument impossible to refute. She cut at the perfect moment, released at the perfect moment, letting the music answer her body and her body question the music back. A strange, shameful chill ran through some of the guests. They realized they had been laughing at the face of an artist. William staggered half a step back. The chart on his face traced a line from contempt, confusion, fear. He looked as though the power he had always stood on had suddenly sat down. Jack, camera in hand, eyes wet, understood that what he was filming was not a farce, but a small piece of history, a moment where beauty overturned force. Eddie at the DJ booth hit a beat a touch too early, but Keisha smoothed it over with a glissade, a graceful glide that transformed a slip into a highlight, the mark of someone who had danced on stages where mistakes were forbidden. She sealed the performance with a stance both proud and bare, arms open, head lifted, breath honed by years of training. A split second of silence dropped like a curtain. Then one clap, 2, 3. The entire hall stood. "Bravo!" ricocheted against the glass ceiling. Shoes stomped, chairs scraped. Breaths heaved, every sound merging into a chorus of collective repentance. Victoria was stunned. After decades of teaching high society, never once had she received a standing ovation like this. But the play wasn't finished. Behind the peak of aesthetics, another summit glimmered. Morality. "Who is she?" someone whispered. An arts patron frowned. "I know that sequence. I've seen it somewhere before." From the shadows, Marcus Reed edged forward, phone still recording, making sure not to miss a single face, especially William's, where the ego was cracking like porcelain. Kesha looked around at the standing circle. She did not bow for applause again. She only breathed and waited. She knew what had to come, the truth. And truth, like music, always arrives on time if you let it lead. She had carried the room to the first summit, beauty. Now came the second, justice, a promise spoken, must be kept. The music stopped. Marcus stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice warm enough to cut through the gasps still hanging after the standing ovation, "allow me to introduce Kesha Monroe, former principal dancer of the American National Ballet." The name dropped like a silent bomb, then exploded in scattered cries of, "My God!" Those who had once sat under the dome of Lincoln Center froze. That sequence of movements just now, utterly unmistakable. Victoria stammered, "No, wasn't she?" Keisha's smile was thin. "The rumors of my career death were greatly exaggerated." William lunged forward. "Staged, blackmail. What gives you the right?" Marcus raised his phone and pressed play. The audio was crystal clear, down to the fizz of champagne. William's voice placing bets, raising the stakes, demanding she scrub the floor, and promising to marry off his son if she danced better than my wife. Then confirming it again after Keisha reminded him, "Keep your word, even if it's just a joke." No one could say a word as William's own voice betrayed him. Keisha didn't raise her tone. "This isn't blackmail, this is accountability. Taking responsibility for words spoken publicly in front of 200 witnesses." That single line shifted the frame. No longer offended at being exposed, but held responsible for setting the rules himself. The redefinition cut like shears through William's fragile cloak of power. From now on, he no longer controlled the naming of the moment. Jack Turner stepped forward, lowering his camera. He looked straight at Kesha. "I want to apologize for my father's behavior tonight." "Shut up," William roared, face blazing. "You'll be out of the company if you open your mouth again." Jack drew a deep breath. Then so be it. Some things matter more than money, like integrity. The room shifted. A son breaking away from his father's shadow, something most in the crowd had never dared to do in public. Kesha turned back to William. "We still have one promise left." "A man in your position keeps his word, doesn't he?" William shouted. "No one can force me to honor a joke." Marcus replayed the second confirmation. The crowd groaned, embarrassed for him. A joke loses its cover when it is repeated, restated, and cheered before an audience. "And the condition I gave," Kesha said slowly. "You will apologize publicly for judging me by my skin color and my work." Faces powdered with makeup, framed in ties and fur, suddenly felt heavy. They had laughed, and now were being forced to question themselves. That was the moral weight of art carried to its end. It turned spectators into witnesses of their own conscience. William staggered, searching for escape. "My lawyer will... His sentence hung unfinished as another wave of applause erupted. Not for dance technique, but for principle. Eddie at the DJ table cut the music entirely, letting silence speak. Marcus lowered the phone, but kept recording. The arc of art was now giving way to the arc of accountability, and power only ever yielded to two things: recordings and public eyes. Jack turned to his father. "Stop this, Dad." Then to Kesha, his voice softer. "If you'll allow it, I'll keep the promise in his place, not because I'm forced, but because it's an honor to stand beside someone with your talent and dignity." Murmurs swirled through the hall. The old script, in which marriage was a prize for entertainment, was overturned. Kesha placed a hand over her chest, took one breath, and said, "I'll agree to dinner with you, Jack. But marriage belongs to two people, decided by respect and love, not by a humiliating wager." The hall rose to its third ovation. This time, many eyes glistened. Not everyone there was good, but many had just learned a lesson they thought they didn't need. William hurled a bitter, "My lawyer will handle this," and stormed out, Victoria trailing behind, her face pale. Marcus stopped recording, looked at Kesha. "The hardest part, it's done." Kesha shook her head. "No. The hardest part is making sure this isn't just a shock, but the beginning of something better." Outside, screens lit up like fireflies. The Turner Holdings gala had just transformed into a public trial, and the heart of the story, the thread that would carry us into what came next, was clear. Shift power with beauty, then hold it with accountability and creation. The dawn after the waltz cracked open with the relentless buzzing of phones. The clip Marcus had filmed split the internet like a blade of surf. Millionaire mocked. Black Maid was once a dance champion. Headlines multiplied. Marriage bet used to humiliate a janitor. Standing ovation from Lincoln Center returns in a Manhattan ballroom. Inside the glass and steel tower of Turner Holdings, the air was heavy, storm-charged. The PR office had become an ER. Partner lists, meeting schedules, press responses, crisis scripts, all in chaos. The board called an emergency meeting. The general counsel sketched the risks: a public promise, video evidence, shareholder fallout. The CFO laid out the cold numbers: $3 million in contracts pulled overnight due to reputational risk. The independent chair slid a file forward. "Mr. Turner, you have 60 minutes to resign. When time is up, the board will vote to remove you." William Turner III sat still, face ashen. Last night he had staged a humiliation. This morning he was the defendant in a corporate tribunal. At home, Victoria Parker locked her bedroom and refused to leave. She hadn't just lost a dance-off. She had lost the meaning of it all. Decades teaching high society ballroom versus one performance that lifted an entire hall to its feet. That equation had no face-saving answer. In private group chats, the queens of the ballroom were unusually silent. Now and then, a single line appeared. "Last night, maybe we laughed too easily." Meanwhile, in a small rented apartment, Kesha's phone wouldn't stop ringing. A European ballet company invited her to choreograph a new work. Lincoln Center offered her a solo return evening. A film studio hinted at buying her story. But the call that broke her down came from the community school where she once volunteered. The kids had pooled $23 in a piggy bank and begged, "Please come back to teach us." On the event company's HR forms, she was still Kesha Moore, the name she'd used to stay quiet. But the name exploding across the web was Kesha Monroe, the stage name of her spotlight years. When William finally tried to call Jack, his son didn't dodge him. They met in William's office, framed awards on the wall. William's first words, "You betrayed me." Jack stayed calm. "No, Dad. You betrayed yourself when you decided arrogance mattered more than humanity." William snapped, "If you publicly apologize to her, you're out of this company, out of this family." Jack looked him straight in the eye. "Then so be it." His voice wasn't loud, but it was final, the register of a man stepping out of a toxic shadow. Right on time, the board reconvened. The resolution was ready. Based on the ethics clause and severe reputational risk to shareholders, the board recommends that William Turner III resign immediately. William tried to stall. "My lawyer will review," but the faces in front of him were no longer from the ballroom. They were people who measured risk in real money. He signed. The pen dragged across the page like a scratch on tempered glass. An empire built on fear slipping away, not from a failed deal, but from a clip a few minutes long. Elsewhere, Kesha sat with Marcus Reed in a small cafe. He set his phone on the table. "Want me to upload the original file to the cloud for safekeeping?" Kesha nodded. "And, Marcus, did you keep the shot that panned across the audience when they stood?" Marcus grinned. "Got every face." Kesha said softly, "I want to watch how their eyes changed, from mocking to silent." Marcus's tone dropped. "That's the most precious evidence." That afternoon, Jack sent a company-wide email, revising the code of conduct, making unconscious bias training mandatory, and earmarking 1% of profits for arts education in underserved communities. Finance frowned. HR applauded. Jack knew. To pull the company from the mud, you can't just scrub the surface. As the sun dipped behind the Hudson, Kesha returned a call from the morning. "Thank you for the invitations. But before I think about galas or films, I want to do one thing: open a small art center for kids." A pause, then a warm voice. "What do you need from us?" Kesha listed specifics. Sprung floors to protect joints, full-length mirrors, training bars, scholarships prioritizing Black children, immigrants' kids, low-income families. Someone on the line chuckled, "Sounds like you're already choreographing a new piece." Kesha replied, "Exactly. The piece is called Revenge by Creation." That night, Victoria signed the divorce papers and packed a few gowns into a suitcase. She chose a small European city, hoping to rediscover the meaning of dance without performance as currency. William, alone in his vast living room, replayed the clip again and again. Sometimes he didn't even recognize his own voice. "If you dance this waltz..." It echoed as an indictment from his own throat. In the mirror, his shirt was still pressed, his tie still perfect. Only the audience's eyes had changed, and performance power lives only in those eyes. At day's end, Kesha sat by the window, opening a fresh notebook. On the first page she wrote 23, a small number, a great meaning. She added, Day 1, find a space. And below, Goal, 6 months. No need to destroy anyone, just build something so beautiful that cruelty shrinks into irrelevance. The first month was about space. Kesha walked the streets not yet fully gentrified, rents still bearable, transit accessible, close to public schools. She chose an old warehouse, high ceilings, raw brick walls, a quick hand sketch, sprung floors to absorb shock, mirrored walls, ballet bars at 2 heights for kids and teens, a corner listening station for music study. Outside, a small garden patch, enough to grow flowers and herbs. The second month was about permits. Fire safety forms, building code inspections, concrete strength checks. Marcus went with her, becoming an unpaid advisor with his patient smile. Jack showed up as the first sponsor, not with a giant check, but with a long-term commitment. Scholarships, floor maintenance funding, an internship pipeline for students. I don't want this center to live off one big splash of money and then starve, he said. It needs flow. The third month was about teachers. Keisha wasn't looking for Instagram stars. She looked for people who knew how to teach a child to stand straight again, to shape arms before shaping habits, to listen before speaking. The job description was clear. This center does not train prodigies. This center builds citizens. A Cuban-born teacher brought rhythm to class. A Bronx hip-hop dancer taught respect for space through popping and locking. A part-time violinist handled musical ear training. The fourth month was about scholarships. The phrase 23 became a symbol. Anyone donating that amount would carry 1 step. Small envelopes stacked up, signed by unfamiliar names: Sophie, 9, lemonade stand money, Tyreek, 12, yard work earnings, Mrs. Rosa, a bit from my pension. Kesha taped each slip onto a wall titled Hands That Lifted Us. The fifth month was about curriculum. Keisha re-choreographed pirouettes into 3 levels to protect kids' knees. She wove port de bras into greetings and apologies. When you make a friend fall, you help them up, and you open your arms to say sorry like this. She added a class called Falling the Right Way, lowering your center of gravity, putting your arm back to catch a friend, looking before you move. Life skills in disguise. The 6th month was the opening. No red carpet, no LED backdrop, folding chairs, cookies, lemonade. Marcus stood at the door, counting children with his eyes. Jack arrived early, personally planting flowers in the small garden around the center. Victoria didn't appear. She was learning silence in a distant city. William wasn't invited and wasn't needed. This wasn't a stage for him. Kesha opened with a short speech. Here, we don't compete over who's beautiful. We learn how to make each other beautiful. The children walked out in new shoes, some still wobbling. The room caught them with warm applause. A chubby boy struggled with a pirouette. The kid beside him touched his elbow, whispering, "Spot on the star in the mirror." A Haitian girl stretched too far, nearly fell, and the hip-hop teacher swept in to catch her, turning the mistake into a living lesson. From the corner, Kesha watched the brick arches reflect small arms in motion. She couldn't remember the last time she felt this light. Revenge by creation. It sounded like a slogan, but only gained meaning when it touched real muscles, sweat, and breath. When the little recital ended, parents pressed forward with awkward thanks. An elderly neighbor whispered, "Tonight I saw my granddaughter beautiful in a way I'd never seen before." Keisha smiled, because tonight you looked at her differently. That night, Jack brought her a sprig of rosemary from the garden instead of cut flowers. "Dinner?" he asked. Keisha nodded. Dinner wasn't at a Michelin restaurant, just a small Italian place with fresh bread toasted at the table. They spoke about first teachers, about unforgettable falls, about that half-turned spin after relearning to walk. When they parted, Keisha thought, some relationships don't need grand promises. They grow in small movements, one rhythm at a time. The next day, Keisha wrote in her notebook, Center, day 1 after opening. New goal, keep rhythm. Because the hardest performance wasn't the night of a standing ovation. It was the daily practice each afternoon, when the city was busy and temptation whispered to skip. While the center settled into rhythm, the waves of public opinion had not. Talk shows invited Keisha. She chose only a few, the ones willing to talk about structures instead of chasing tears. At a law school panel, the question was asked, where is the boundary between a joke and a commitment in a public space? Kesha recounted the Waltz night, then said, if we normalize humiliating others in front of a crowd, what are we teaching children? The auditorium fell silent. A professor summed it up. Freedom of speech does not include the right to strip others of dignity without accountability. William's lawyers sent threatening letters. The clip violated image privacy rights, was edited without full context. Marcus forwarded everything to the pro bono firm that had already offered Keisha support. Public setting, hundreds of witnesses, multiple independent recordings, a clear public interest purpose. Their reply was polite but firm. You have the right to speak. The community has the right to remember. Not long after, William withdrew his threat. He was busier with his shrunken life, odd consulting gigs, cold handshakes. Online, some asked, did the media exaggerate? Losing $3 million overnight sounds like clickbait. Keisha answered in a long interview, I don't hold the books. I only know that night we went too far. And I also know we can walk back by building. She admitted the moral story had its exaggerations. No court would force anyone to marry off a child over a drunken line. The odds of her regaining peak dance form after her injury were slim. But if we obsess over footnotes and skip the ethical question, we turn ourselves into lawyers for coldness, she said. Jack kept cleaning up the company's legacy. Diverse recruitment programs, bias training, anonymous reporting channels for harassment. One VP whispered it was performative. Jack invited him to the center's Friday class. The man stood in a corner, watching a chubby girl spin half a turn, the whole class applauding. Then muttered, I can't remember the last time the company clapped for half a turn. Jack smiled. Then let's start clapping. Victoria, in Europe, slowly learned how to be silent without shame. She signed up for a beginner's technique class, sat in the back, listening to music through her knees instead of her ego. Sometimes she replayed the clip, not to envy but to study, to learn how beauty had defeated humiliation. No declarations, no interviews. Atonement, perhaps, began with self-healing. A charity gala invited Keisha to perform a short piece. She agreed, on one condition. I want to bring 10 of my students on stage. The organizers hesitated. Risk, uneven skill, technique? Kesha told them, they don't need to be perfect. They need to be seen. That night, amid glittering gowns, the children stepped out. One lost the rhythm. The one beside him steadied his hand. The hall gasped, then broke into thunderous applause. Kesha stood a half-step back, letting the children catch the spotlight. At the end, the host asked, if you could say one thing to yourself on the night you were humiliated, what would it be? Kesha paused, then answered, thank you. Because without that night I wouldn't have found the reason to build this place. The hall rose again. Not for technique, but for the cause and effect logic of kindness. On a windless evening, William slipped into the back row of the center, cap pulled low. He watched the falling correctly exercise, children learning to lower their center of gravity, roll shoulders, extend a hand to catch a friend. He let out a bitter chuckle. He had never learned to fall, and so, when he fell, he dragged down countless others. When class ended, he stood and left quietly. No one noticed, no photos taken. A man learning silence. That night, Keisha wrote in her notebook, "Tomorrow's lesson, apology." She would teach the kids to open their arms and look straight, to say, "I'm sorry," not as escape, but as reconnection. In the margin, she sketched 3 faint words, curtain call. Because every performance needs a proper ending. Not cruel, not sugar-coated, only true, true to dignity. On Saturday afternoon, sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the Keisha Moore Center for the Arts, scattering across the mirrors where little golden stars were taped as spotting points for the children. Marcus Reed stood at the door, guest list in hand. He had a habit of counting the small arms each time class began. As his private reminder, the second act of the Waltz night, the act of creation, was now playing out daily. "Straight back, but don't be stiff," Kesha said, walking down the line, gently adjusting the shoulders of a chubby boy. She placed her hand on his elbow. "Think of your arm as a greeting." The class giggled. Today's lesson was the beginner pirouette, broken into 3 stages, combined with the star on the mirror game, eyes fixed on a star sticker to keep balance. In the corner, Eddie, the Dijo from that infamous night, now worked part-time as accompanist, plinking out simple piano chords to steady trembling feet. Midway through, a construction worker father, his jacket still dusted from the job site, hesitated at the doorway. Marcus invited him in. He shook his head. "Ballet doesn't fit my son." "I'm afraid he'll get teased." Keisha stepped over with a smile. "Come watch the falling the right way lesson first." Inside, 2 children practiced lowering their centers, turning shoulders, and reaching out to catch each other. "Here," Keisha said, loud enough for him to hear, "we don't teach kids never to fall. We teach them how to fall without hurting themselves or others. That's civic education." The father saw his boy being helped back up after a stumble, and his eyes softened. "If that's so, then my son should learn." Jack Turner arrived near the end, sleeves rolled, carrying a crate of rosemary plants. He set them by the window frame. "These thrive in sunlight, smell wonderful. Let the kids pick sprigs to decorate before a show." A few Turner Holdings staff trailed behind, watching nervously. Jack whispered, "Next time, we'll bring the managers here. They need to see this." A VP muttered, "The company's too busy." Jack smiled. "A child's half-turn today might keep a good engineer with us tomorrow. Culture doesn't waste time. It saves time." A group of late-arriving donors came in, long coats, polished shoes. They proposed renaming the center after a lead sponsor with a grand plaque in the lobby. Kesha listened, thanked them, then walked them along the small wall covered in handwritten notes. 23, Sophie, lemonade stand. 23, Tariq, yard work. 23, Mrs. Rosa, pension savings. She spoke gently. "This place already has a name, the hands that lifted us. If you want to join us, be one of those hands, not the figure standing in front of the mirror." One man chuckled, raising both palms. "I get it. We'll fund. No plaque needed." By late afternoon, the center held its neighborhood showcase. Folding chairs, cookies, lemonade. The children lined up, their steps uneven, but their eyes shone like freshly wiped glass. A Haitian girl wobbled on a chaîné, almost falling, when her friend grabbed her wrist. The audience gasped, then burst into applause. Eddie shifted into a piano waltz, and Kesha stepped back half a pace, giving the floor to her students. In the back row, the construction worker father gripped his cap tightly. When his son managed a half-turn spin, he jumped to his feet, clapping as though he had just witnessed a world record. At the end, an elderly neighbor leaned in close to Kesha. "Tonight, I saw my granddaughter beautiful, in a way I've never seen before." Kesha smiled. "Because tonight you looked at her differently." Marcus glanced around, pressing record on his phone out of habit. "That waltz night you reversed the room with beauty. Here, every day, we hold that reversal with warm discipline." Kesha nodded. "And we'll record it, not to shame anyone, but to honor the small moments that carried us through the hard days." As the doors closed, Jack asked, "Lend me the floor for 30 minutes?" Kesha looked surprised. Jack removed his shoes, stepped onto the wooden floor, and clumsily tried port de bras under her guidance. "Why are you learning?" "To learn how to see. You're teaching me to see with my body." Kesha laughed. His first lines were stiff, but his intent stood straight as pillars. "All right," Kesha clapped. "Today you learn to greet. Tomorrow you learn to apologize." Jack nodded, like a student handed his first homework, eager for the day to turn it in. At the edge of night, a figure lingered outside the glass door. William Turner III, cap pulled low, watching the class. He saw children learning to fall, to lift, to greet, and suddenly he heard his own words from that night echo back, "If you dance this waltz." For the first time in months, he didn't argue. He just stood still and watched. The invitation to the open forum, words and accountability spread quickly. Kesha wanted to turn social media energy into face-to-face dialogue. Contract workers, service staff, artists, business people, parents, everyone had a seat. Jack Turner co-hosted, sharing the new Turner Holdings Code of Conduct and reforms to hiring and grievance systems. Marcus handled the filming as always, not to threaten anyone, but to keep the record straight. The hall was packed. A female banquet worker spoke. "I was once told, keep your voice down, you don't belong here." That night I filmed, and I felt seen because of Kesha. A restaurant manager raised his hand. "We're rewriting our workplace rules. No jokes about skin color, bodies, or jobs." When I read it, some employees laughed. I told them, "Laugh, but tomorrow read again." Jack presented a change map. Mandatory unconscious bias training. Anonymous reporting channels. Diversity quotas in hiring. 1% of profits going into arts scholarships. He said, "I used to think culture was just posters on the wall. Now I know it's the small moves repeated every day." The room applauded, not thunderous, but steady. In the middle of discussion, a figure stood at the back, removed his cap. "William Turner III." The room murmured. He didn't ask for a mic. He walked straight to the stage, stopped a few steps from Kesha, and asked to speak briefly. Marcus's camera followed. William breathed like a man practicing the falling right exercise and trying to rise again. "I spoke a cruel joke," he began, voice hoarse. "I judged her and many others by skin color and job. I turned marriage, something sacred, into a bet for humiliation. I was wrong." No one clapped. Kesha met his eyes, refusing to rescue him with easy grace. William continued, "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to accept consequences, and to ask you one thing. What should I do, not today, but for the next 10 years, so this apology isn't just a performance?" Kesha drew a breath. The waltz night flickered in her memory like a reel on fast forward. the crystal tray shattering, the laughter, the waltz, the pirouette, the grand jeté, the fouettés, the standing ovation, the recording, the promises, the legal threats, the center, the $23, the children, the falling right lesson. She answered slowly, "You don't owe me a personal apology. You owe it to the community you made invisible. If you truly want accountability, 1. Public apology, today, here, and allow us to publish it verbatim. 2. Volunteer as a mentor in the Management Ethics and Power Program. No pay, no PR photos. 3. Contribute to the 23 fund with no naming rights. If you must sign, write, someone learning to fall the right way. 4. For 10 years, take no legal action against those who remember that night." The hall was silent. William nodded. "I agree." He turned to the audience, repeating clearly, "I, William Turner III, apologize. No excuses. No but." Marcus recorded every word. When he stepped down, a middle-aged waiter stood and said quietly, "Thank you, but don't expect applause. Meet us again in a year, in 3, in 10, and let's see if you've kept rhythm." William nodded, this time like a student handed a long-term assignment. When the forum ended, reporters asked Kesha, "Do you forgive him?" She shook her head. "Forgiveness is the privilege of those harmed. I don't represent them all. What I can do is set boundaries and build structures that protect children from jokes normalized into cruelty." A young journalist asked Jack, "Aren't you afraid of burning bridges?" Jack smiled. "A bridge that leads to a place we shouldn't go. Burning it is a good thing." That night, the post, full text of the apology, appeared on the center's page. No comments, no emojis, just text and video. The reactions were mixed: suspicion, sarcasm, tears, pragmatism. Kesha turned off her phone, went back to the wooden floor, and taped another star on the mirror. "Tomorrow's lesson, fouetté?" Eddie asked. "No," Keisha smiled. "Tomorrow's lesson is apology." 1 year after the Waltz night, the center held its first $23 scholarship ceremony. The wall of "Hands That Lifted Us" had grown thicker with layers of paper, the scribbles of children, the careful script of elders, the slanted writing of a night shift waitress. Victoria Parker quietly returned to the city, sitting in the back row, no makeup, no fur coat. She slipped an envelope into the donation box, $23, and a note that read, "Someone learning to listen." At the end, she asked Keisha for a volunteer spot, a gentle balance class for older women. Kesha nodded. "The door is open." Jack Turner escorted a group of young managers from the company to attend. They watched the children perform a waltz Keisha had translated into ballet for small bodies, mixed with Bronx-style hip-hop steps. One boy stumbled off beat, his friend caught his hand. The hall smiled, then clapped. Not for perfection, but for solidarity. Jack leaned over and whispered to the once skeptical VP, "Here, people clap for half a turn." The man nodded, eyes fixed on the stage. Midway, Marcus Reed was invited up to receive a small framed photo. A still from the waltz night, not Keisha dancing, but the audience at the exact moment their eyes changed. "Thank you for remembering," Keisha said. Marcus smiled. "We remember to be better, not to keep grudges." For the finale, Kesha and the children performed a new piece. Waltz for the unseen, for those once made invisible. Eddie composed the music, piano and violin weaving together. Port de Bras blended with hip-hop isolations, a shortened chain of fouettes, enough to hint, never to flaunt. At the center of the formation, Keisha stepped back half a pace, letting her students step forward. The closing gesture was not a grand leap, but 2 hands touching, to hold and to be held. As the stage quieted, William Turner III emerged from the back row. He didn't approach the stage, only walked to the donation table, laying down an envelope marked 23. Someone learning to fall the right way. No photos, no applause. He turned away, lingering before the wall of hands for a long moment. Some lessons can only be graded by time. After the ceremony, a small garden party opened outside, where Jack had planted flowers from day one. He carried trays of pastries made by parents, listened as Victoria spoke of her gentle balance class, listened as a girl proudly pointed out the star on the mirror bearing her name. Kesha stood near the rosemary planter, inhaling its warm fragrance, her heartbeat syncing with the buzz of the courtyard. She remembered the very first words of that night. "If you dance this waltz," and smiled. She had danced it, but not to be married off, not to diminish anyone, but to open a floor where no one needed permission to exist. A young reporter asked, "If you had to summarize the lesson, what would you say to a child mocked for being poor, for their skin, or for their parents' jobs?" Kesha paused. "You are not the labels others stick on you. You are the movements you repeat every day. Standing tall, greeting with open arms, falling without dragging others down. And when you can, lifting the person beside you. Then you dance, not to prove yourself, but to turn the room into a kinder place." Before lights out, Kesha walked the wooden floor, touching each bar, fixing a star that was peeling. Marcus locked the doors. Eddie packed his instrument. Jack stacked folding chairs. The three stood on the porch for a moment, gazing at the city lights. "Tomorrow," Jack asked, "what do you teach?" Kesha smiled. "Apology and gratitude." Marcus nodded. The two hardest dances. Eddie struck a playful chord. "And after that?" Kesha looked at the sky. "After that, we keep going. Because the most beautiful thing isn't a standing ovation. The most beautiful thing is tomorrow's practice schedule." Curtain call, but not the end. The question remains with everyone who had been in that waltz hall, and with everyone reading these lines. When faced with a wager meant to humiliate, would you bet $500 on the powerful, $1,000 on the spectacle, or 23 on a first step? And if someone has ever tried to bury your dreams under prejudice, remember, the strongest answer isn't to shout back, but to dance so well that no one can look away, and afterward, if you can, to build a floor where everyone has a place. And so, from a public humiliation, Keisha transformed it into a chance to rewrite her life. Not only to rise, but to build a stage for those once despised. Her story reminds us that true dignity isn't in money or status, but in how we treat one another when we think no one is watching. What about you? If you were in Kesha's place, would you walk away in silence or stand and prove your worth? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share to spread the message, and subscribe for more inspiring stories to come.